The mess hall hadn't been touched in nearly a decade. Its windows were long shattered, ivy pushing through the cracks in the stone foundation. Squirrels nested in the rafters now. Beneath the sagging roofline, moss clung to the wood siding like it belonged there. It had once echoed with children's laughter. Now it smelled of mildew and decay. John Kempler, a contract janitor working for the state, wasn't thinking about missing girls or ghost stories when he stepped through the rotting door that morning. He was thinking about black mold and how many hours were left in his shift. The camp, formerly known as Lake Raven Pines Youth Retreat, was being cleared for demolition. The state had finally approved the land transfer to a conservation group, and Kempler had been hired to prep the buildings for inspection. His job was simple: cut out the mold-damaged paneling and bag the debris. But as he peeled away one warped section behind the dry goods shelving in the mess hall's kitchen, something unusual caught his eye. A small, faded strip of fabric, wedged between the studs, tucked behind the insulation. It wasn't part of the building. It looked like a bracelet. He hesitated. The lighting was poor, but the moment he tugged it free, a soft clatter followed. A dusty plastic water bottle rolled out next. Still half full, its lid long cracked from time. There was something written on the side in Sharpie, smeared but readable under the dust. Low, with a heart drawn beneath it. John stepped back, suddenly aware of the quiet pressing in around him. He opened his phone and snapped photos, unsure what he was even documenting. Then he called his supervisor. By sunset, the county sheriff had arrived. An evidence team followed 2 hours later. What they found behind the moldy panels would reignite one of the most unsettling cold cases in state history, 9 years early. In the summer of 2016, 5 girls disappeared from this very camp during the final week of session. Their names were etched into 1,000 missing posters, broadcast on news stations for weeks, and then, over time, forgotten. Elena Cruz, 13, quiet but fiercely protective of her younger cousin. Madison Hale, 12, the counselor's favorite, always volunteering, always smiling. Rowan Blake, 14, smart and cynical, the one who kept a journal. Sasha Patel, 13, who brought her walkie-talkies and loved exploring. And Lorelei Lowe Jennings, 11, the youngest. The water bottle belonged to her. They were bunkmates in Cabin 5, friends. Vanished without a trace during a thunderstorm on August 12th. Not a scream, not a single call for help, just gone. Back in 2025, Detective Bryce Marin stood on the mess hall's back porch studying the cracked steps where generations of campers once lined up for evening meals. The place was silent now, save for the sound of cicadas and the crunch of his boots on dead leaves. His partner, Detective Lena Howard, emerged from the kitchen holding an evidence bag. "The bracelet," she said, holding it up to the sunlight. The woven thread was frayed, discolored by time, but 5 tiny beads remained. Each bore a letter: E, R, M, S, L. Initials. Matching the girls, Marin murmured. Elena, Rowan, Madison. He trailed off. He didn't need to finish. Everyone remembered those names, not just because of the tragedy, but because the case never made sense. The storm had knocked out power and communications, yes, but no sign of struggle, no open gates, no forced entry. Their belongings were untouched in the cabin. Counselors had seen them just before lights out. And then, nothing. Some believed the girls had planned to run away. Others whispered darker theories about cults, hidden predators, or a cover-up inside the camp itself. The official investigation, despite months of effort, yielded nothing. In the end, the camp was quietly shut down. Lawsuits followed. Insurance battles. The land sat abandoned ever since. Until now. Until the bracelet and the bottle, and, most unsettling, the journal page found tucked deep behind the insulation. Marin flipped open the evidence folder and stared at the recovered page. Water damaged, the ink had bled in places, but the image was unmistakable. A pair of wide eyes drawn in pencil, hollow and ringed with shadows. Above it, in shaky handwriting, "If you find this, we're still trying." That evening, the story broke across local and regional media. Breaking. Cold case from 2016 reopened after discovery in abandoned camp building. The girls' families were contacted. Some answered. Others had changed numbers. One mother collapsed after seeing the bracelet photo. Investigators sealed off the old campgrounds. A forensic team was brought in to survey every structure inch by inch. By nightfall, floodlights lit up the broken cabins, and the question hanging over it all was simple. If those girls were still in the camp after the search teams left, how did everyone miss them? And if they were hiding, what were they hiding from? 9 years ago, August 12, 2016, had started like any other evening at Lake Raven Pines. Dinner had been grilled hot dogs. There was a bonfire planned for the older campers, but lightning storms were already moving in from the hills. Around 8 o'clock p.m., counselors began moving kids indoors. Some were excited. They loved storms. Others, especially the younger ones, clutched their sleeping bags and complained about the loud thunder. Cabin 5, where the 5 girls had been staying, was tucked at the edge of the camp property, just beyond the archery range. It was a small A-frame with creaky steps and one narrow window looking out toward the woods. The last person to see all 5 girls together was a junior counselor named Kara Thorne, who had done a flashlight check around 9:45 p.m. She'd seen them tucked into their unks, whispering and laughing, still dressed in their camp t-shirts. Kara had said it felt like a normal night. Nothing seemed off. But by morning, they were gone. Their blankets were in place. Their shoes were still by the door. Sasha's walkie-talkies were missing. So was Lorelei's refillable water bottle, and one of the first aid kits kept under the bunk had been taken too. The storm had knocked out power overnight, and the main road had washed out. It was nearly 11 a.m. before camp leadership realized the girls weren't at breakfast and launched a full search. Dogs, drones, volunteers. Over 150 people scoured the surrounding woods for 3 weeks. Not a single piece of evidence was ever found. Until now. Back in 2025, Detective Lena Howard sat alone in the reopened case office, reviewing the original witness statements. "Something doesn't add up," she murmured. She was staring at Kara Thorne's statement again. It was the one part of the file that never sat right with her. Kara had said she'd checked on the girls at 9:45 p.m., but the lightning detection system at the weather station, located less than a mile away, had recorded a direct strike on the camp's water tower at 9:47 p.m. It had knocked out the radio, fried some of the security cameras, but most critically, it caused the fire alarm panel to overload, which should have triggered a silent alert. But no one received it. Why? Howard flipped to the camp maintenance logs and found what she was looking for. The mess hall panel had been malfunctioning for 2 weeks prior. It had been scheduled for inspection the following Monday, August 15th. So if the girls had tried to signal, and the alarm panel hadn't worked, would anyone have known? In the reopened crime scene at the mess hall, forensic teams continued their sweep. Behind the crumbling drywall, they found more clues. A damaged walkie-talkie. Kai, wrapped in what appeared to be a t-shirt sleeve with a cracked antenna. A child's waterproof watch stopped at 11:03 p.m., and inside a sealed Ziploc bag, likely placed for protection, was a second page from the journal. It wasn't a note. It was a map. Drawn in pencil and barely legible, it appeared to depict the campgrounds from above, with crude outlines of buildings, trails, and several hand-drawn X's. But there was one symbol circled. Not a location, but a word. Crawl space. Detective Marin narrowed his eyes as he stared at it. "There's no crawl space beneath the mess hall," he said aloud. One of the forensic techs shook her head. "Not in the blueprints, no. But the foundation's old, built in the 60s. We wouldn't know unless we cut into the slab." They didn't have to. Because that same evening, a retired camp director named Virginia Lowell called the county sheriff's tip line. She had seen the evening news segment and recognized the bracelet. Her voice trembled as she spoke. "I know that bracelet. The girls made them during arts and crafts. I still have mine." But then she added something else. "There used to be an old utility crawl space beneath the mess hall. It was sealed off after a plumbing accident in the 80s. Nobody used it after that. But I always thought someone should have checked down there. Back then, I mean." 2 days later, excavation began. A concrete section beneath the pantry flooring was drilled and lifted, and what they found underneath sent chills through the entire investigative team. A narrow, dirt-lined tunnel, no more than 3 feet high, ran for nearly 15 feet. It was pitch dark, filled with insects, animal droppings, and debris. But near the back wall, flashlight beams landed on something unmistakable: a stack of rolled-up sleeping bags, a half-eaten granola bar, and the most haunting clue yet, a small, waterproof flashlight still clutched in the hand of a girl-sized skeletal forearm. Detective Howard felt her knees weaken. "They were here," she whispered. "All of them." A medical examiner was called in. The remains would take weeks to fully analyze, but the crawl space proved something that had long haunted families, law enforcement, and local parents for years. The girls hadn't vanished. They had hidden, and for at least a little while, they'd survived. The crawl space was barely large enough to crawl through, a forgotten space behind rusted pipes and rotting floor joists. It smelled of mold and earth. Dampness clung to the dirt walls like sweat. Forensics worked under floodlights for nearly 12 hours. The girls' skeletal remains were gently lifted from the compacted mud, still partially wrapped in the remnants of a camp-issued sleeping bag. Bits of nylon clung to her spine. Her wrist still wore a cloth friendship bracelet, barely faded, woven in pinks and blues. In her right hand, gripped so tightly her fingers had curled into the casing, was a child-sized waterproof flashlight. It had long gone dark. By mid-morning, 2 more discoveries were made. Near a broken pipe toward the far corner of the crawl space, a personalized aluminum water bottle was found, dented but intact. The name Lorelei, hand-lettered in purple paint marker. Next to it, sealed in a cracked plastic case, was a small camp journal. The pages were damp and smeared, but a few were still legible. Most were just drawings, scribbled stick figures, trees, the sun, and a lake. But one page stood out. A crude drawing of the mess hall layout, labeled in a child's handwriting, and beneath it, a single sentence, jagged and trembling. "We heard footsteps. He was still out there." Detective Lena Howard sat on the edge of the trailer steps, reviewing the findings under a tarp in the rain. She didn't speak. She couldn't. This wasn't just about a missing persons case anymore. This was about fear, and the children who had known it long after the rest of the camp had gone to sleep. 9 years earlier, August 12, 2016, 10:42 p.m. The storm had passed. In cabin 5, 5 girls lay awake in their bunks. The thunder had shaken the windows earlier, but it wasn't the storm that kept them from sleeping. It was the man. He'd been out there again. They were sure of it. Kayla had seen a light near the woods. Lorelei had heard a voice. Sasha, the one with the walkie-talkies, had begged the others not to say anything. "He watches," she whispered, huddled beneath her blanket. "He listens." The oldest girl, Amber, had once snuck out to the mess hall alone and claimed she'd seen a man standing in the shadows of the supply shed. No one believed her. The counselor said it was just the maintenance worker doing rounds. But Amber swore he wasn't wearing a camp uniform, and worse, he'd smiled at her. That night, as the girls whispered back and forth in the dark, something made their decision for them. The emergency light in their cabin flickered and went out. Then came a sound outside. Footsteps. Quick, deliberate. Sasha reached for her walkie-talkie and pressed the button. Static. Then a strange whine. "Get your stuff," Amber whispered. Now. 2025. Present day. The forensic team found evidence of a second entrance into the crawl space, boarded shut behind a foundation beam beneath the pantry shelves. It had been sealed from the inside. They had used it as a shelter, possibly even a hiding place, either from someone they feared or someone who had already been inside. The girls had taken only the essentials: one damaged walkie-talkie, a camp-issued first aid kit, now found emptied, a journal and pencils, flashlights, water bottles, snacks, and whatever items they could quietly carry. It suggested planning, panic, but also hope that someone might find them if they stayed quiet, if they stayed hidden. But no one ever came, and one by one, the lights went out. Tuesday. Sheriff's briefing room. "I think we need to consider this as more than just a runaway case," said Detective Howard, sliding a PHETT photo of the crawlspace across the table. "This doesn't look like a group of girls who got lost. It looks like they were trying to escape something." Sheriff Corwin leaned back, arms crossed. "You think someone was after them?" "I think someone was already inside the camp." The room went silent. Howard tapped the corroded remains of the walkie-talkie on the evidence tray. "This isn't camp property. The walkies issued at Raven Pines were blue. This one's black, civilian model, higher range, possibly modified." "Could have been brought from home," someone muttered. "Maybe, but the girls weren't allowed to bring electronics," Howard reminded them. "We need to pull employee rosters, especially night staff, security, maintenance." She paused, then added quietly, "and the counselors." That night, alone in the evidence room, Detective Howard opened the journal again. Most of it was childlike doodles, trees, animals, boats. But one page near the back had words that stopped her cold. They weren't signed. They weren't addressed, just scrawled in faint pencil. "If anyone finds this, we tried. We were brave. Please tell our moms we tried." Howard pressed the page closed gently, then sat in silence, staring at the wall. They had tried. They had been brave. And for nearly a decade, no one had known. Until now. Thursday, early morning, Camp Raven Pines was no longer the cheerful place its brochures once promised. What remained was a skeleton of cracked cabins, rusted flagpoles, and fading signs swallowed by overgrown weeds. By the time Detective Lena Howard arrived with her team, heavy rain had begun to fall. The mess hall's roof leaked in 3 places, and the floorboards in Cabin 5 groaned with rot. The janitor who had reported the discovery, a man named Leo Marquez, 58, worked seasonally for the state, waited near the truck, arms folded, face tight with unease. "I wasn't snooping," he said again. "The panels were black with mold. I pulled one off and something fell out." Detective Howard had already seen the report, a child-sized waterproof watch, with a cracked face, stopped permanently at 11:53 p.m., and a small, refillable water bottle with faded stickers spelling the name Sasha. But it wasn't the items that got her attention. It was what was behind them. Wedged into the insulation was an empty first aid kit, its bandages shredded and the inside marked with small pin lines, tally marks, countless of them. Dozens, maybe hundreds, scratched deep into the plastic. "I figured it was squirrels or something," Leo said, "until I saw the names." Howard nodded slowly. "You did the right thing." Back at the precinct, forensic analysis confirmed it. 3 distinct sets of fingerprints on the items. 2 matched the original missing girls, Amber Reyes and Sasha Emond. The third was unknown, most likely one of the other girls, Kayla, Lorelei, or Beth. But more disturbing than the fingerprints were the surface residues found on the inside of the kit, traces of dried blood, human hair, fiber consistent with camp-issued uniforms. For 9 years this had all been sealed inside the mess hall wall. Someone had put it there. The question was, why? Meanwhile, Detective Howard reviewed camp records again. There was no sign of forced entry that night, no missing vehicles, no criminal record among the registered staff. But one name stood out, not for what it said, but for what it didn't. A groundskeeper hired just 2 weeks before the disappearance, no last name listed, no address on file, just a first name, Rick. Howard's team spent hours combing through payroll files, state records, and contractor lists, but no one named Rick had ever been officially hired. A ghost on paper. She circled the name on the printed staff roster and wrote beside it, "Might have used alias?" Back at the mess hall, Howard returned alone after the forensics team had finished. She stood in the center of the decaying building, rain still drumming on the tin roof, staring at the half-torn wall panel. For a long time she said nothing. Then she stepped forward, knelt, and looked behind the torn insulation. The space was tight, barely wide enough for an arm to reach through. She turned on her flashlight. Deep in the shadowed void, something shimmered faintly. Reaching in, she pulled out a small object wrapped in wax paper. It was a bracelet, faded but intact, hand-woven, just like the ones children make at summer camp. But this one was different. The colors weren't bright. They were dark, blue, black, and red. And it wasn't tied with a loop. It was knotted at both ends, as if it had been tied on the wrist, then cut off. Howard turned the bracelet in her hands. Then she noticed something else. One of the colored beads wasn't a bead at all. It was a tiny etched metal tag. Scratched into it were 3 letters: K, LB, Kayla, Lorelei, Beth, the 3 youngest. It wasn't just a bracelet. It was a memorial. Later that night, Howard sat at her desk alone, rereading witness statements from 9 years earlier. She fixated on one in particular, from a girl named Megan Hart, who had shared cabin 6 near the missing girls. She'd told police something that had never been followed up. "The last night I heard someone crying in the pantry. I thought it was Beth, but when I went to look, no one was there. Only the freezer door was open. It had been dismissed as a dream, a child's fear. But now it seemed like something more." Howard scribbled in her notes: pantry, potential secondary access point, freezer, idle hiding spot. Then came a call that changed everything. A new maintenance worker, hired to clear fallen trees after the storm, had found something strange near the back of the property: a buried trail camera, nearly a decade old. It had been placed high in a tree, facing the mess hall's back entrance. The camera had long been dead, but the memory card inside, still salvageable. An analyst was already retrieving the data. Howard stared at the file name on the screen. Yule Chapter 1216, Night Shift. MP4. She didn't breathe. Did someone record the last known night at camp? Was Rick watching all along? The screen flickered once, then stabilized. Detective Howard and forensic analyst Rowan Summers sat silently in the darkened lab as the footage played. The video was grainy, static-heavy, filmed from a cheap trail camera mounted in the trees. A timestamp in the corner read, July 12, 2016, 11:46 p.m., less than an hour before the girls were last seen. In the frame, the rear of the mess hall, barely illuminated by moonlight. Weeds crowded the ground, and tree branches cast warped shadows across the siding. The mess hall door opened. A small figure stepped outside. At first, Howard thought it was an animal, but then it moved into the light. A child. She couldn't be more than 10 or 11, pale shorts, camp-issued T-shirt. She turned as if whispering to someone behind her, then walked out of frame. Seconds later, another figure emerged, taller, moving differently. A man, not wearing a camp uniform. He moved cautiously, pausing to look both ways before following the child toward the trees. The footage went dark again. No other movement. No return. No sign of a struggle. Just disappearance. "This angle," Howard said, "doesn't show the parking lot." "No," Rowan confirmed. "But wait, there's more." He clicked through 2 other video files recovered from the same memory card. One showed the same area at sunrise. A white utility van, unmarked, backed into the tree line, parked for approximately 6 minutes, then gone. License plate unreadable. But something else caught Howard's eye. A logo, barely visible on the driver's door, faded green like forest camouflage. Howard froze the image. "Can you zoom in on this symbol?" Rowan tried. The resolution was poor, but there it was. A circular patch with a pine tree, surrounded by a broken ring of text. Only a few letters were legible. Field Services Contracting, Licensed Repairs. Howard leaned back slowly. She recognized that patch. It belonged to a now-defunct third-party maintenance company, contracted by the state during seasonal repairs. Filed under state audits as Temporary Facility Support. The same crew who had sent Rick, the one with no surname, no home address. She stared at the screen in silence. The van hadn't been parked outside the cabins. It had been behind the mess hall, right where the hidden clues were found. Back at the precinct, she pulled the archived employment file. One document stood out, A signed work order for electrical repairs in the mess hall, dated July 10, 2016, 2 days before the disappearance. Signed by Richard Keene, Employee ID number 7832, Emergency certification, pending, no background check on file. A note at the bottom said, "Worker cleared verbally by site manager." The site manager had died 3 years ago. Howard paced her office. The timing, the location, the forged paperwork, all of it painted a chilling timeline. Day 1. Rick arrives at camp under state contract. Day 2. He's seen working in the mess hall, where, years later, the bracelet and survival items are found. Night of day 3. The girls disappear. A child is seen leaving the mess hall. Rick follows. The next morning, Rick is gone. So is the van. Later that evening, Howard drove to the edge of Lake Wallerton, just past the camp boundary. The road curved around a forgotten hiking trail now overrun with wild blackberry bushes. She parked and got out, eyes scanning the tree line. A local hunter had once reported a man-made shack somewhere back here, years ago, half submerged near the old canal system that was part of the region's outdated irrigation grid. No one had followed up at the time. The area was technically outside camp property. But this was different now. With flashlight in hand, she picked her way through the brush. The trail narrowed, then opened suddenly near a bend in the woods. A rusted hatch sat in the ground, half covered in moss and vines. Howard crouched. The hinges were stiff, but the lock, long rusted, gave with a firm twist of her multi-tool. The hatch creaked open. Cold air rose from the darkness below. She descended slowly, metal steps groaning under her weight. At the bottom, the space opened into a narrow corridor, a forgotten canal tunnel, once used to divert rainwater during storms. The concrete was damp and streaked with mold, but mostly intact. She moved deeper, light flicking across old pipes and moss-covered beams. And then she saw it. Scratched into the wall, beneath layers of grime, were letters. They weren't recent, but they were deliberate. KLB as all 5 girls' initials, etched side by side, just above an old wooden crate. Howard knelt and opened the crate. Inside, nothing. But there were marks, impressions in the dust where something had been. Multiple small objects, long removed. Who had taken them? Why had this spot been sealed off? And why would a missing child leave a trail like this, unless she'd hoped someone, someday, would follow it? Howard climbed back into the open air, heart pounding. This place, the canal tunnel, it had to be part of it. Had someone used it to move unseen? Had it been a hiding place or a trap? That night, she added a note to the official case log. Wall clues were never random. Girls may have been alive longer than assumed. Bracelet and items suggest coordinated attempt to communicate. Canal structure warrants full excavation. The man sat across from Detective Howard, his hands clasped tightly together, forearms resting on the interrogation room table. His uniform still had paint flecks on the sleeves, and a set of keys dangled from his belt loop. His name tag read Miguel R. He wasn't a suspect, not really, just the one who had found the wall. Howard's voice was calm, steady. "Walk me through it again." Miguel exhaled. It was during mold abatement. The whole west side of the mess hall's interior walls were warped. You could smell the damp soon as you stepped in. They gave me clearance to pull off the outer paneling. He paused, still uncomfortable. But behind one of them, the far side near the dry goods pantry, I saw something tucked into the cavity. At first I thought it was trash, but it was too neatly arranged. "What did you see?" Miguel swallowed. It was weird, like a kid's stuff, but hidden on purpose. A plastic friendship bracelet, a broken walkie-talkie, a little pink bottle, the kind for water with a name scratched into it, KLB. I didn't want to touch too much, it looked old, and there was an empty first aid kit too, just the case, like someone had emptied it out and stashed it. "Any names?" Howard asked. "Just the initials on the bottle." Miguel said. "And a sticker on the walkie-talkie with a camp cabin number, Birch 3. Howard nodded slowly. Birch 3. That was Kayla Boone's cabin. "You did the right thing calling it in," she told him. Miguel looked away, shame flickering in his expression. "I worked here as a teen. Just summer jobs. Same camp. I was here the year those girls vanished. I didn't know them, but I remember the day the buses didn't come. The panic, the helicopters." Howard leaned forward slightly. "Did you remember anyone by name?" "Only the girl with the curly hair. She used to sneak into the staff kitchen with drawings for the cooks. Said she wanted to be a baker when she grew up." "That was Sarah Emsley." Miguel nodded. "Yeah, that's her." Later, Howard sat in her car staring at the recovered objects in sealed evidence bags. The child's watch, waterproof, still scratched with bronze. White marker doodles. The bracelet. 5 distinct color beads, 1 for each girl. The walkie-talkie, shattered screen, missing antenna. The personalized bottle, a cheap camp-issue model, cracked at the lid. The first aid kit, empty, but with fingerprints confirmed from the 2016 case files. And finally a short page torn from a notebook, folded and nearly unreadable due to moisture damage. But one line still survived in purple ink. "We heard them again. Don't go near the hatch after dark." The writing was clearly by a child. Howard closed her eyes, so they hadn't vanished instantly. They were still there for at least a while after the alarm was raised. Why hadn't the staff heard anything? Why was there no record of a search inside the mess hall? Back at the precinct, Howard reread the original incident report from July 13, 2016. It confirmed what she feared. The mess hall was sealed off on day 1 due to mold risk. The state inspection team had red-tagged the building early that summer, and it was off-limits to campers. That's why no one had searched it thoroughly. The girls weren't supposed to be anywhere near it, which meant they were either brought there or chose it themselves to hide. But from what? Howard reviewed the newly unearthed staff logs. One note stood out. A counselor had reported missing radios the same day the girls disappeared. 2 walkies from the maintenance shack inventory are unaccounted for. The walkie Miguel had found might have been one of them, which meant the girls had gotten access to staff gear and maybe used it to try to communicate. But no one ever heard them, because the staff frequency had been changed that morning. A tech upgrade. The girls may have been broadcasting on the wrong channel the entire time. Howard's chest tightened. They were calling for help, and no one ever heard them. That night, she returned to the canal entrance, this time with a small search team. They followed the concrete tunnel deeper. The air grew colder. Pipes above their heads dripped condensation, and the beams groaned faintly, as if still remembering their purpose from decades ago. Then they reached the back chamber. A wide, sloping tunnel split off, partially collapsed, but not fully sealed. It led deeper toward the old water filtration reservoir used before the municipal system took over. A faded warning sign was barely legible. "Danger. Water purge zone. Do not enter." Howard's radio crackled. One of the officers ahead of her had found something. "Ma'am, you need to see this." In the corner of the reservoir structure, lodged beneath fallen timber, was an old canvas duffel. It was bloated with water damage and mold. They brought it to the surface, opened it carefully. Inside, a camp counselor's clipboard, a bundle of wristbands from different cabins, labeled with color-coded beads. And at the very bottom, a tightly sealed plastic pouch with something that made everyone fall silent. Inside the pouch, 5 Polaroid photos. Faded, a little smeared from time, but clear enough to show 5 girls, sitting on the ground in the mess hall, wrapped in sleeping bags, flashlights in hand, all of them looking at the camera and smiling. On the back of the photos, someone had written a single sentence in thick red ink. "We stayed quiet, just like you said." The following morning, Detective Howard returned to the site, not with crime scene tape and flashing lights, but quietly, methodically, almost reverently. The mood had shifted. This was no longer just a missing persons case. Not after those photos. The expressions on the girls' faces haunted her. They hadn't been running. They weren't screaming. They were waiting and trusting someone. That photo meant someone knew they were there and told them to hide. The question now wasn't just what happened, it was who knew and why no one came back. Howard met with a retired camp counselor named Shay, non-lively, now in her 60s. She'd worked every summer at Cypress Pine Camp until it closed. "I remember that year," Shannon said, wrapping her hands around a cup of tea. 2016. "It was supposed to be my last. I only stayed until mid-June, got called home when my brother got sick. But yes, I remember the names: Kayla, Becca, Sarah, Nyla, and June. They were in different cabins, but always together." "Did anything seem off before you left?" Howard asked. Shannon nodded slowly. "Yes. Something was wrong with the birch cabins. They weren't even supposed to be used, but we were over capacity that year. The director had construction delays and lied on the forms to get through inspections." "What was wrong with them?" "Black mold, foundation rot, and one of the old water lines kept flooding the lower cabins." Howard blinked. "Flooding?" "Yeah. I remember 2 girls moved because their duffel bags got soaked. It was reported, but just patched up, not fixed." She hesitated. "There was this maintenance guy, name was Eric. He kept trying to clear it out. He was odd, kind of shy. Said he used to be a camper there in the 90s. Howard found Eric's name in the archived employee files. Eric Dunst, seasonal maintenance, hired May 2016. No home address listed, only a P.O. box. She ran it through the DMV and found he still held an active license. No priors, nothing suspicious, but something about his file felt scrubbed, too clean. She checked for forwarding addresses. None. She called in a digital trace request, but before her text could respond, she received an alert. One of the fingerprint matches had returned. The first aid kit retrieved from behind the wall. It carried partial prints of Kayla Boone, confirmed by the 2016 dental and fingerprint records provided by her parents. Howard stared at the screen. It meant Kayla, or someone with her, had placed it there after they were already missing. 9 years ago, someone told them to stay quiet, and they did. She returned to the camp that afternoon, walking alone along the crumbling grave. The path between the old cabins. Many were rotted through. The birch cabins, long since boarded up, leaned sideways from the warped ground beneath them. She circled Birch 3. Her boots sank slightly in the damp soil. This was the cabin assigned to Kayla and Becca. Howard stepped up to the broken porch and peered inside through a crack in the wood. The floor had buckled, the far wall had collapsed, and in the dimness, something glinted. She pried open a gap and slipped inside. Dust swirled. It smelled like mildew and earth. Carefully, she knelt beside the glint, a metal loop, half buried beneath the warped floorboards. It was the cap of a refillable water bottle, pink, cracked, scratched with the initials BJ, Becca Jordan. Nearby, she found an old plastic flashlight, dead and faded, with peeling glitter stickers, a scrap of pink cloth. Then she saw something else. Just along the wall, a set of 5 tally marks carved into the wood, another 5 beside them, then 3, then 1, then none. A countdown. Howard emerged from the cabin just as a radio call came through. "Detective, we've got something." She drove back to the canal structure where forensic divers had continued searching the collapsed reservoir area. The lead diver, Ramirez, was removing his gear. "You're not going to like this," he said. He handed her a waterlogged backpack. It had no name, but inside was a notebook, soaked, most pages destroyed. One drawing survived. 5 stick figures, 4 standing close together, 1 apart. The figure farthest away had Dad written in blue crayon above its head. Below it, "We waited. He said wait, but now it's too late." Howard couldn't breathe for a moment. It wasn't just tragedy, it was betrayal. That night, she sat with the entire case board reassembled. All photos, all notes, new evidence added. Photos, bracelet, watch, bottle, waist, walkie-talkie, journal page, drawings, the Polaroids. All of it placed behind a sealed wall in a building everyone thought was off-limits. The girls were alive for days, maybe longer, and someone made them believe that staying silent would keep them safe. Howard picked up the Polaroid again. The girls looked at the camera like they trusted the person holding it. not with fear, but with hope. They buried what was left of the waterlogged journal at the base of a pine tree near Cabin Birch 3. There wasn't enough of the paper to preserve, no fingerprints left to lift, but the message was enough. We waited. He said wait. But now it's too late. Detective Howard didn't sleep that night. Instead, she reviewed every statement ever made from the original 2016 staff. She wasn't looking for inconsistencies now. She was looking for absence. And she found it. Eric Dunst, the part-time maintenance worker who claimed to have been a camper there once, was never mentioned by anyone in their interviews. Not once. He'd been listed on payroll, but no counselors, no directors, no kitchen staff recalled working directly with him. It was as if he'd stayed invisible. By choice. With a warrant in hand, Howard and 2 officers visited the property listed under his name. A cabin just 30 miles from the old campgrounds, deep in the woods, hidden behind miles of unpaved access. They arrived just after dawn. The wind stirred through the pine needles overhead. The cabin was empty, furniture coated in dust, food expired in the pantry, no sign of anyone living there for years. But the basement, that was different. Tiled, dry, sealed with heavy plastic, organized storage shelves, labeled bins, and on the far wall, 5 hooks, each with a name: Kayla, Becca, Nyla, Sarah, June, and beneath the hooks a single word painted in faded blue: Safe House. Back at the station, Howard pulled out the original staff photo taken the summer the girls vanished. She stared at each face. Not one of them looked like the DMV image of Eric Dunst. She flipped over the image. The names were listed on the back, but Eric's wasn't there. She enlarged the photo, and that's when she saw him, barely visible in the background near the back of the mess hall, holding a toolbox. Head turned slightly toward the girls in the foreground, expression unreadable. It was never clear if he meant to help them or not. He might have told them to hide. He might have promised he'd bring help or food or come back. But if he did, he never did. And the camp shut down just 2 weeks after the disappearance, officially due to mold damage and legal issues with the land. No one went back. No one opened that wall. No one listened long enough to hear what was left inside. The janitor who first found the hollow panel, Mr. Amos Miller, later told a local paper, "I wasn't expecting anything more than mold and maybe a dead squirrel. I tapped on one panel and it sounded different. Hollow. When I peeled it back, I saw something wedged between the beams, a glittery bracelet, like from a kid's arts and crafts kit. Then a plastic watch, then something else. It kept coming." He stopped mid-sentence during the interview, swallowed. "I have 2 daughters," he said quietly. "If they were lost, I'd want someone to find something. Anything." Of the 5 families, only 2 still lived in state. 3 had moved across the country in the years since, each slowly hollowed by loss. When they were called, none of them asked, "Are they alive?" They only asked, "Where did you find it?" Detective Howard didn't have answers for them, not the kind that brought peace. The girls had vanished in a place that should have been safe, and the people who ran it, or who were supposed to check on it, simply didn't. 1 year later, the Cypress Pine campgrounds were leveled. The state declared the land permanently closed and unfit for redevelopment, but a portion was converted to a memorial garden overseen by the families. In the center stood a stone with 5 names, and beneath it a small bronze plaque. They waited. We didn't listen. Never let silence be the end. Detective Howard never stopped thinking about the girls. Every time she walked into a missing persons case with kids involved, she remembered the wall, the bracelet, the drawing, the countdown. How many other messages were still sealed behind drywall? How many final attempts at contact never reached anyone? The Eric Dunst file remained open. No arrest was ever made. Some suspected he'd died alone in the woods. Others believed he'd changed his name and disappeared into the system. But none of the families spoke his name publicly, because in the end, what haunted them wasn't who he was, but what he wasn't. Someone who followed through. The discovery behind that mess hall wall didn't solve the case. It didn't bring the girls home, but it shattered the idea that they had vanished without trace. For 9 years, everyone believed they were gone without explanation. But now, the world knew. They had waited. They had hoped. They had trusted someone. And someone failed them. The last entry on the notebook page, blurred by time and rot, read only, "We tried to be brave,